Okay, so let me get these regards out the way. Welcome to the World is King CJ Music Podcast, where we talk about music. And so, let me put this disclaimer out here before I get angry comments about it, all of this. So, the conversation stems around basically, right, the idea that Beyonce's new two singles, 16 carriages, and another single she dropped, right? So she dropped this music, and it's by some, and this is a disclaimer for the Beehive and everyone else. Look, I am not trying to start by any means, I'm not trying to start a civil war, an argument, or any of that. I want to have a conversation, right? Because I've had conversations with people about this topic, and we've come to this. We haven't come to the same conclusion. It's more of a agree to disagree, right? Because the concept of these two songs are completely different, right? Like, they're talking about. Well, let me do this before we get there. Let me talk about the factors that bring up this argument from both sides of this field, but also from a middle third party. Let's talk about these arguments from each side. So we're gonna talk about each argument from each side, and I don't want to make anybody upset. But the people I also talked to about this want to keep it anonymity, so we're not gonna mention their names. But this is a conversation I've had. So the conversation started with, if someone's from Texas, in a sense, right? In a sense, do they get the right to make country music, right? And we all agreed the origin in which you're from shouldn't matter, right? However, there was a conversation about the topic. The topic was, most time when people hear country music, it's about love, it's about their trucks and other small town stuff. Which is true. I think that, that's a true side of this conversation we must have. But the other was saying that as all music is basically set around this idea, it's a way to express ourselves, right? Through our lives, the way that we live, certain experiences that we have, and the way that we live, right? And to some extent, I think both of these answers are right. And by both of these, ideas, right? Since, it's more what the focus of most of these are, right? These two songs technically fall under this umbrella of, okay, well, it's about a person's experience. It talks about being in a small town, technically, right? It technically talks about living in a small town. Houston is huge, but technically it's a small town, depending on where you live in Houston. By the same idea, it kind of brings, it really doesn't talk about trucks as much, but it kind of talks about, relationship connections, attachment styles, which to some extent people have argued that's what country is, right? The next question is this: is it country or is it hitch hop? And I want to write this. So country in itself, people will argue, comes from blues. And if we're talking blues, I think the guy we can't not mention is Jimmy Rogers. Now, Jimmy Rogers, for a lot of people that may not know, I think the best way to explain him, Jimmy Rogers. Okay. So he was born, we'll say 1924. He died, not recently, but 97, right? So he was from Chicago, but he was an American blues singer, guitarist. I think he played the harmonica, right? He was in a band in the early 50s, in the later 50s. As I said, he was born in 1924. So in 1950, he joined a band called Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters released a good amount of music. It wasn't, it's not much popular. it's not it's not as popular as it's not as popular as it was earlier as Muddy Waters. As when he was part of the Muddy Waters band, they released Marsh Boy, which I'd say if you haven't heard it, go listen to it, right? But that's another conversation, right? But the conversation is, where does it fall? And I hate having this argument because I can't necessarily tell you. And if you came here for me to tell you, I can't tell you. But I'll tell you, I'll sum this up quickly by saying Jimmy Rogers created blues, was a blues harmonica player, right? And so my favorite song of his, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but it's Walking by Myself, where it starts with kind of a steel guitar, right? And this is what we're going to talk later. But then we'll go, because Gary Moore also did a rendition of it. But Jimmy Rogers does Walking by Myself. And it has, to some extent, it has an a steel guitar. Because you can hear it, kind of when he goes, walking by myself, right? It has a flair to it. I don't necessarily know how to describe it, but it starts off walking. It has that kind of flair to it, which is kind of a slower pace than hip hop, but it is common. However, when we talk about hitch hop, we have to talk about an artist called Troy. Well, his stage name is Cowboy Troy, right? And this Cowboy Troy from me, right? I don't know. Like, I don't know if, because it's been rumored for years that hitch hop wasn't necessarily recognized, but anyway, hitch hop has more of a steady guitar, more like an electric guitar. And this concept of basically he's playing chicken with a train, which, I mean, it's okay. It doesn't necessarily sound it doesn't sound necessarily the ideal, right? The ideal kind of country, right? So we have Jimmy Rogers, we have Cowboy Troy, right? And so hitch hop, to a certain extent, is different, and I don't know if this is something common. I don't know if this is something common because personally I don't have any connections or people to talk to directly about how they feel about this kind of hitched hop kind of music, which I can understand why people will say that Beyonce 16 Karat isn't country music, right? Because country music has a certain theme to it, and when things fall out of this theme, they fall into hitch hop or pop, which it sounds weird, right? Because that popular music, by definition, is music that's popular at the time, right? And by popular music, we could argue, and the argument can be made, it's not country and it's not hitched hop, which people argue that she's breaking into country, right? And to a certain extent, I think we get into this argument of, okay, that concept's key. That's to country. Those are clear, right? But it's weird. People say, because hitched hop, especially when people say that it's not country, it's hitch hop, seems weird to me because hitch hop, from my understanding, between hip hop, jazz, green, bluegrass, and stuff like this, then pop music isn't a category by itself, right? I think people will say that they hate popular artists because of pop music and stuff like that. So, popular music, right? But it's weird, right? Because people have said it's I don't know. It's weird because if I remember correctly, Colt Ford is still alive, I believe, right? But he's considered what country? Is he considered a country rapper? And country rap, by this idea, is country with a kind of hip hop kind of style to it, which I don't know. It's weird, right? Because this idea is that it's and I it's that it's technically it's about drinking beer, women, and it's weird, right? Because I don't know. Granted, I'm not a huge it's weird, right? Because and so this is what I will say. This is my argument that I don't know if it falls under hip hop, and I don't know how people in country feel about hip hop, because people will say that it falls under pop or it falls under hip hop, which has been the argument all week. But I don't know if hip hop, right? Because, and I don't mean to offend anybody that makes country music that falls under hip hop that isn't necessarily offended by it, but it's weird. So technically, the Oxford Dictionary of Hitch or Hick, I don't think Hitch, Hick, is a person is what is defined as being unintelligent, which I don't know. I won't, and I'll say this. I don't think any artist that makes anything creative is unintelligent. So that's where I'm kind of like, I don't necessarily know how country sees that, right? Because I don't see anything that somebody creates as a person being unintelligent. So I don't necessarily understand the argument. The second argument is that it doesn't have like a string. It doesn't have a steel guitar, and it's not talking about beer, women, and for some reason trucks. And that's a whole argument that I don't quite understand that argument, right? Because I think she's talking about her lifestyle. It might not be trucks, so I don't. Right? Because I've been arguing, and people have said that country music in itself, right, doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily need strings. But there are some people like, I'm strongly strings. It's more popular music because it's in the middle, right? Because it doesn't have like a steel guitar, which sounds weird to me but Cowboy Troy didn't have he had a steel guitar, but he had kind of drums that were in it. So it's a weird thing, right? Because by that concept, it seems that hip hop, but also country music, has a strict guidelines on what they consider certain music to be. And for certain people, certain things are acceptable, which is partially why people have said for years that music in itself is subjective, right? Because you see people that are like, this isn't country music, but you also see people that are like going to dive bars. And dive bars, for people that don't know, dive bars are bars that are like below basement or like into the basement, where you walk into the basement, and it's because it's below level. I think because it's the way the government was set up in what 19 something. Let me be honest with you, 19 something. Was it 19? It's weird. Now this is the thing, and I don't necessarily know, and I'm not here to focus on that part, right? But I don't know. I don't know if it has a certain like, I don't know if it has a certain like race or ethnicity that people prefer their country music to be. I'm not entirely sure, right? Like I don't know, right? Because I've got 3 guidelines. It must have a truck. It must have a woman, beer, or it must be about a truck, life, beer, a woman, or their trucks. And by that same criteria, if that is a criteria, I think it marks two, maybe two of the three, right? And I don't know if that's the case, and so, right, because I think if we take experience, that's women. I think that's drinking. I think it's beer and women. I think that song fulfills that, right? But I don't know what the actual criteria are for country, because there doesn't seem to be any guidance. At least at the CMAs, and I don't see like a certain criteria, which I don't know if there's a certain criteria in country music which differs. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's weird because country music in itself is meant for it's supposed to be a ballad, and it's supposed to be able to dance it with simple music, simple lyrics, and I think right, I think it falls under that. But I don't know. It's supposed to be harmonies. I mean, I don't know if it falls under romantic, right? Like I don't know. Like the thing is, I don't see like, and I couldn't find criteria, right? Because if the criteria is string instruments, we can argue that she played a few country instruments, but it's not all country instruments. And if the fact that it's not all country instruments disqualifies it, it's weird to go blues, right? Because blues in itself, I think, clarinet, saxophone, I think trombone, I think certain different instruments that have like a heavier sound to it, like a baritone, like heavy. They're light, right? But you can hear a violin. I don't know. But string instruments, I don't know if they mean like a violin, because it's weird, right? Like the criteria itself makes certain sense, but then when you ask for a style, like a more defined definition than just it has to have blues with string instruments, which could be a guitar, of course, it could be a violin, a banjo, of course, but it doesn't give you much guidance. And it's supposed to be like a dance hall, which I don't know. I'm not entirely for sure, right? But country music used to be called something else. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not entirely sure if there's enough criteria, and if there is, let me know, and I'll make a retraction. I'll definitely make another announcement or retraction. I'll do any of those publicly, right? But I don't think there's enough. I don't know. Like I don't know if there's enough guidance to clarify what exactly is country music, what isn't, and if this falls under pop. Pop is just popular music made by artists, which we can argue is any music that's made after the person's first single, right? Or we could do like that. Like we could put The Weeknd in pop music, which he's the popular artist making popular music. So, but I think he falls under. I think The Weeknd actually falls under pop. I think he classifies his music as pop. I truly believe that's what he does. I think he classifies his stuff as pop. I don't know if but if it's just that it has to have strings, then Stromae can be classified under country if he ever wanted to. Yeah, but The Weeknd's under R&B and soul, right? He's not under pop, he's R&B and soul, and R&B and soul would be R&B music, and R&B music isn't technically popular music. So that's what I'm saying. Like R&B has a strict guidelines of what it's supposed to be, what the person's supposed to be doing. You know, R&B and soul has like a strict guidelines. Rap kind of has it. You just have to speak about your experience in any way you see fits, right? But I don't know. I don't know. So 16 Karat to me, and this episode is truly just to start a conversation. It's not even about, oh, someone's right, somebody's wrong. I haven't found clear guidance, and I know if people are like, well, it talks about this, and it talks about her family life, and it talks about her experiences, it should be classified under country. I just more want a conversation around country, and I think my platform is a good way to start it. A conversation about country music, and I think this is more just to start a conversation. It doesn't have to be necessarily, oh, we have to, the Beehive or Beyonce don't make country music because X, Y, and Z, right? And a radio station also said that they don't play Beyonce or something because when somebody else plays the country music, they'll play it, in which we've seen a lot of R&B and soul stations play this song. So it's a question of what is it classified as, and if the artist classifies it as something, can we change like in Lil Nas X situation where they didn't want him to be classified as country, so he got a country artist? If Beyonce does the same thing, would that classify as country? Like I'm just curious because I've seen this kind of happen before, and I don't know. I don't know. I would want people to explain their reasoning, but I don't know if I can do this on this podcast, which is interesting because that's a main focus of starting a podcast. But overall, that would be the question: is what is considered country and why is it not considered country? But overall, I don't know. This was basically just to start a conversation and then to have a few focus points. So if I want to go back over the focus points, the focus points are Jimmy Rogers that created blues, and then Cowboy Troy, which created hitch hop, which is a genre of country, but I don't know if people just call it hitch hop, hick hop. I don't know if they call hick hop pop. So the overall discussion I had was just 3 simple points we had, and the overall consensus that we agreed on is that country music has to be, or the guidance we kind of tried to make sound like it was good, and I don't know if it's necessarily wrong. String instruments with a blues intention, and that the way we described it is a blues intention, as in looking for a blues sound, like a blues sound that is normally considered blues, like a B flat, like a B flat scale, or like a normal scale that we would hear in a lower range where it's mostly strings, but it can deviate just a little bit. But for that same point, it has to be with the intent of blues, the blues or country use. That also has to be a direct correlation of someone's experiences in a small town or a town, and we just couldn't. That last point, we just couldn't figure out how to explain it. What do we classify experiences under? Do we classify it as just trucks, beers, women, and this? Because if we do, and about love, then I don't know, right? But overall, I don't know. Do you think our criteria fits what you would consider country, or is there something you would add to this criteria to make this country? I don't know. So, I don't know. This is a new take. This is a new style of way I'm addressing situations now. So we're gonna have a conversation. What do you consider country? With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the Royalist King CJ King CJ Music Podcast. And I hope this opened a discussion about music fans from the Beehive, but I also from country lovers themselves. I hope that this kind of brings people to have a discussion, a truthful discussion. Biases, confirmation bias, in the front and peer review. I just want to know, what do you consider country, and how can we break this down to where country is the focus of a discussion?